The wolf's howl tore through the trees just as Mira dropped to her knees beside the fallen man, her hands shaking, her stomach twisted with a hunger she had learned to ignore. Blood soaked through his torn shirt. His breathing was shallow. She had no food, no medicine, nothing but a small piece of stale bread wrapped in a cloth inside her pocket, saved for herself after 2 days of eating nothing at all. She did not think about that. She thought only of the stranger dying in front of her. "Hey," she whispered, pressing her palm gently against his cheek. "Stay awake. Please, stay awake." His eyes opened slowly. Gray eyes, sharp even in pain, studied her face like he was trying to decide if she was real. He tried to speak, but no sound came out. Mira reached into her pocket and pulled out the bread, breaking it in half with trembling fingers. "Here," she said, holding it toward his mouth. "Eat this. You need strength." He stared at the bread, then at her thin arms, her hollow cheeks, the way her dress hung loose on her small frame. He understood, even through the haze of pain, that this piece of bread was likely everything she had. "Are you hungry too?" he managed to ask, his voice rough like gravel dragged over stone. Mira smiled, though her stomach ached with emptiness. "Not as hungry as you look right now. Eat." She did not know that the man in front of her was Kale, Alpha King of the Northern Packs, betrayed by his own beta and left for dead in the forest that bordered the human village. She did not know that wolves twice her size were hunting him at that very moment, tearing through the woods in search of the king they believed they had killed. She only knew that a person was hurt, and that hurt people needed help. Kale took the bread from her hand. His fingers, still trembling from blood loss, brushed against hers. He ate slowly, watching her the entire time, waiting for her to ask who he was, why he was bleeding, why wolves had been chasing him through the trees. She asked none of it. Instead, she tore a strip of cloth from the bottom of her own dress and pressed it against the wound on his side. "This will have to do until we get somewhere safe," she said. "Can you walk?" "I don't know," Kale admitted. It was the first honest thing he had said in years. As Alpha King, he was surrounded by people who told him what he wanted to hear. This girl, this stranger with hollow cheeks and kind eyes, spoke to him like he was simply a man in trouble. Nothing more, nothing less. She helped him to his feet, draping his arm over her shoulder despite how much taller and heavier he was. Her legs shook under the weight, but she did not let go. Step by step, they moved through the trees, away from the direction the howls had come from, toward the broken-down shack she called home at the edge of the village. The shack was small, barely more than 4 walls and a roof made of old wood and rusted metal sheets. A single cot sat in the corner, a small stove that rarely had anything to cook, and a shelf with 2 cracked plates. It was not much, but it was warm, and it was hidden from the road. "Sit here," Mira said, guiding Kale onto the cot. She knelt beside him and examined the wound more closely in the dim candlelight. It was deep, but not as deep as she had feared. "You're lucky. A little more and this would have been much worse." "Lucky," Kale repeated, almost laughing despite the pain. Lucky was not a word he associated with betrayal, with running through the forest while his own beta ordered wolves to hunt him down. But looking at the girl cleaning his wound with what little clean water she had, lucky suddenly felt like the right word. "What's your name?" she asked, not looking up from her work. He hesitated. His name, spoken anywhere near the Packlands, would bring soldiers, healers, questions he did not want answered yet. Not until he understood who had betrayed him and how deep the betrayal ran. "Kale," he said finally. It was true, at least. Just not the whole truth. "Kale," Mira repeated softly, testing the name. "I'm Mira." "Mira." He watched her tie off the bandage with practiced hands. "You've done this before. When you grow up with nothing, you learn to fix what breaks. There's no one else to do it for you." She sat back on her heels and looked at him properly for the first time since finding him in the forest. Beneath the dirt and blood, he was younger than she had first thought, his face carved with sharp, handsome lines, his body built like someone who trained, who fought, who led. But his eyes held something rawer than strength. They held fear, carefully hidden. "Thank you," Kale said quietly. "For the bread. For this." He gestured to the bandage. "You didn't have to help me. Nobody has to help anybody," Mira said, standing to fetch a cup of water from the small barrel by the door. "But it's not hard to be kind, even when you have very little. Especially then, actually." She handed him the cup. "Drink." Slowly. He drank, watching her over the rim of the cup. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the thin walls of the shack. Somewhere far off, another howl rose into the night, closer this time. Mira flinched at the sound. "Wolves," she said, wrapping her arms around herself. "They've been getting bolder lately, coming closer to the village." Kale's body tensed. He knew exactly why the wolves were bold tonight. They were searching for him, or for his body, to confirm what they believed had already happened. If they found this shack, if they caught his scent inside these walls, the girl who had just saved his life would be in terrible danger. "You should leave," he said suddenly. "Tonight. Go somewhere else." Mira frowned, confused by the sudden change in his voice. "Leave? This is my home. Where would I even go?" "Anywhere but here." His voice was firm, almost commanding, and for a moment something flickered behind his eyes, something ancient and powerful, that made Mira take an involuntary step back. Just as quickly, it vanished, replaced by exhaustion and pain. "Are you in some kind of trouble?" she asked carefully. Cale looked away, staring at the small candle flickering on the shelf. How could he explain that trouble had followed him his entire life? That being born to lead meant being born a target? How could he explain what he was, what he had lost, without frightening this girl who had shown him more kindness in one night than his own court had shown him in years? "Yes," he admitted, "I'm in trouble, but it's not your trouble to carry. I'll leave in the morning, once I have some strength back. I won't put you at risk." Mira sat down on the small wooden stool across from the cot, studying him in the candlelight. There was something about the way he spoke, the weight behind his words, that told her this was no ordinary traveler. But she had learned long ago not to pry into things that were not offered freely. Everyone in the village had secrets. She had her own. "You can stay as long as you need," she said instead. "I don't have much, but I have this roof, and I have time. You're in no condition to walk far tonight." "You're too kind for your own good," Cale murmured, his eyelids growing heavy from the combination of blood loss and the first real rest he had allowed himself in hours. "Maybe," Mira said with a small shrug. "Or maybe kindness is the only thing I have left to give, so I give it freely." She stood and pulled a thin blanket from a chest near the wall, laying it gently over him. "Sleep now, I'll keep watch." "You need rest too," Cale said, though his voice was already fading. "I've survived worse nights than this one," she said softly. "Sleep." He wanted to argue, wanted to tell her that a king did not sleep while others kept watch, that protection flowed the other way. But his body betrayed him, pulling him down into exhausted sleep before he could form the words. Mira sat by the small window, watching the dark tree line beyond the village, listening to the distant howls grow fainter as the night wore on. Her stomach growled painfully, empty since she had given away her last piece of bread, but she did not regret it. Something about the stranger sleeping on her cot, despite the mystery surrounding him, felt important, felt like a moment that would matter. She did not know yet how right she was. Hours passed. The candle burned low, casting long shadows across the small room. Mira's eyes grew heavy despite her best efforts, her body finally giving in to exhaustion after days of scavenging and worry. She drifted into a light, uneasy sleep in the wooden chair, her arms wrapped around her knees for warmth. She woke to the sound of Cale's voice, low and pained, mumbling words in his sleep that she did not understand. Words that sounded old, formal, almost like commands given to soldiers. She leaned closer, careful not to wake him, and caught a single clear phrase amid the mumbling. "Tell the pack, I am not dead." Mira frowned, sitting back slowly. Pack. The word echoed strangely in her mind, stirring old stories she had heard as a child. Stories about wolf shifters who ruled the northern territories, about an alpha bloodline that could take human form. Stories she had always assumed were nothing more than legend, told to frighten children into staying close to home after dark. She looked at Cale's sleeping face, at the strange strength in his features even in rest, at the way his body seemed built for something far greater than the simple traveler he claimed to be. A chill crept up her spine, not from fear, but from a growing suspicion she was not yet ready to face. She pushed the thought away. Whatever he was, whoever he was a wounded person who needed help, and that was enough for tonight. Morning would bring answers, or it would bring nothing at all. Either way, she would face it when it came. Outside, the forest grew quiet again, the howls finally fading into silence. Mira closed her eyes, letting sleep take her once more, unaware that the man she had saved held more power in his blood than she could possibly imagine, and unaware that her small act of kindness had just changed the course of an entire kingdom. By the time the first gray light of morning touched the horizon, neither of them knew that this was only the beginning of a story far bigger than a shared piece of bread, far bigger than a chance meeting in the woods. It was the beginning of something that would test loyalty, unravel secrets, and challenge everything Mira thought she knew about survival, kindness, and the strange, quiet power of caring for a stranger who needed it most. The wound would heal, the bruises would fade, but the bond formed in that small, broken shack, Born from a piece of bread and a simple question, "Are you hungry too?" would prove impossible to break, no matter how many wolves came searching through the dark. Morning came with a sharp knock on the door that made Mira's heart jump into her throat. She rose quickly from the wooden stool, her body stiff from sleeping upright all night, and glanced at Cale, who was still asleep on the cot, his breathing steadier than it had been hours before. Whoever stood outside would see him if she opened the door too wide. "Who is it?" she called out, keeping her voice steady. "It's old Ferris, from the bakery," came the reply, muffled through the thin wood. "Brought you the burnt loaves again, if you want them." Relief washed through her. Ferris was the closest thing to a friend she had in the village, an old baker who often gave her the burnt or misshapen bread that could not be sold. She opened the door just enough to slip through and closed it firmly behind her. "Thank you, Ferris," she said, taking the small bundle of bread from his weathered hands. "You didn't need to walk all this way." "Wasn't far," Ferris said, squinting at her with the sharp attention of someone who had known her since she was a child. "You look tired, girl, more tired than usual. Everything all right?" Mira forced a small smile. "Just a rough night. Thank you for the bread. Truly." Ferris studied her a moment longer, clearly unconvinced, but he did not push. "Eat something today. Your skin and bones." With that, he turned and shuffled back toward the village path, leaving Mira standing alone with the bundle in her hands. She slipped back inside to find Cale awake, sitting up slightly on the cot, watching her with careful eyes. "Who was that?" he asked. "Just the baker. Brings me bread sometimes. The loaves nobody else will buy." She set the bundle down and knelt to check his bandage. "How do you feel?" "Better," Cale admitted. And it was true. Whatever pain had racked his body the night before had eased considerably, though soreness still lingered deep in his side. Wolves healed fast, faster than humans, and already he could feel his strength returning. He would need to be careful not to let her notice how quickly. "You should eat," Mira said, breaking off a piece of the bread and holding it toward him. "You should eat first," Cale countered, gently pushing her hand back toward herself. "You gave me your last piece last night. I won't take more from you while you go hungry." Mira hesitated, surprised by the firmness in his voice. Nobody had ever insisted she eat before him. In the village, she was often the last to receive anything, the last to be considered, the last to matter. This stranger, wounded and mysterious as he was, spoke to her as though her hunger mattered just as much as his own. "Fine," she said softly, taking a small piece for herself before handing him the rest. "But you're still recovering. You need more than I do right now." They ate in comfortable silence for a while, the morning light filtering through the cracks in the shack's walls, painting thin golden lines across the floor. Cale watched her carefully, noting the way she ate slowly, savoring each bite, as though she did not know when her next meal would come. It struck him harder than he expected, the realization that a person could live like this, could exist on the edge of hunger every single day, while wolves in his own kingdom feasted freely at every meal. "Can I ask you something?" Cale said finally, breaking the silence. Mira glanced up. "Depends on the question." "Why do you live like this, alone, out here, with so little?" He gestured around the small shack. "Do you have no family?" Mira's expression shifted, something guarded settling over her features. "My parents died when I was young. Fever, the same year it swept through half the village. I've been on my own since then. The families in the village have their own mouths to feed. Nobody had room for one more." "That's not right," Cale said, his voice hardening slightly. "A community should care for its own, especially its children." "Maybe in the world you come from," Mira said, a hint of bitterness slipping into her tone before she caught herself. "Here, everyone fights just to survive. There's no room left over for charity. Not really. What little kindness exists, people give when they can, like Ferris and his burnt bread. It's enough to keep me going. I've learned not to expect more than that." Cale fell silent, absorbing her words. In his own territory, food was distributed by rank, by loyalty, by usefulness to the pack. The weak, the sick, the ones who could not contribute, often found themselves pushed to the margins, much like Mira had been pushed to the margins of her own village. The realization sat uncomfortably in his chest. He had never questioned the system before. He had simply been born into privilege, born to rule, born to never know hunger the way this girl knew it. "What about you?" Mira asked, turning the question back on him. "Where do you come from? Why were wolves chasing you through the forest?" Cale's jaw tightened. He had known the question would come eventually, had hoped to delay it a little longer. But Mira had earned honesty, even if he could not give her the whole truth yet. "I come from the Northern Territories," he said carefully. "I was traveling when I was attacked. People I trusted turned against me. I don't fully understand why yet, but I intend to find out. Attacked by wolves, Mira repeated slowly. The same wolves we hear howling at night? Yes. He met her gaze steadily. I know it sounds strange, but there is more to this world than most people realize. Wolves that are not simply wolves. Territories ruled by more than just human law. Mira studied him for a long moment, weighing his words against the strange things she had noticed since finding him. The unnatural speed of his healing, the commanding tone that sometimes slipped into his voice, the mumbled words about a pack that she had overheard in the night. Pieces were beginning to fit together, forming a picture she was not entirely ready to accept. You're one of them, she said quietly. It was not quite a question. Kale held her gaze, deciding in that moment that partial truths would no longer serve either of them well. Yes, he admitted, I am. Mira sat back, processing this. Fear flickered through her. Old stories of wolf shifters rising unbidden in her mind. Tales of danger and violence passed down through generations of village folklore. But looking at Kale now, at the careful way he watched her, waiting to see if she would flee, waiting almost fearfully for her judgment, she found that fear giving way to something else. Curiosity, compassion, the same instinct that had made her share her bread the night before. Are you dangerous? She asked, though her voice held more curiosity than fear. To my enemies, yes, Kale said honestly. To you, never. Something in the way he said it, simple and absolute, eased the tension in Mira's shoulders. She nodded slowly, accepting his answer, though questions still lingered behind her eyes. Does this change things? Kale asked carefully. Do you want me to leave? Mira considered the question seriously, glancing toward the door, toward the world beyond it, that had never shown her much kindness. Then she looked back at Kale, at the wound she had bandaged, at the honesty in his eyes even now. No, she said finally. You're still healing. You'll stay until you're strong enough to protect yourself out there. After that, what you do is your own business. Relief passed through Kale's features, quickly followed by something warmer, something he did not have a name for yet. Gratitude, perhaps, or the beginning of something deeper that he was not ready to examine too closely. Thank you, Mira, he said softly. Don't thank me yet, she replied, a small smile finally breaking through her earlier tension. You still owe me actual conversation while you're stuck here. It gets lonely, living alone. Kale found himself smiling back, an easy, genuine smile that felt foreign after years of careful, guarded expressions in his own court. I think I can manage that. Outside, the village continued its quiet morning routines, unaware that within one small, broken shack, a bond was forming between a starving human girl and a wounded alpha king. A bond built not on power or politics, but on something far simpler and far more dangerous to the schemes already forming back in his territory. Genuine, unguarded trust. Neither of them yet knew how quickly that trust would be tested, or how far the wolves hunting Kale were willing to go to make certain the true king never reclaimed his throne. 3 days passed since Kale had first opened his eyes to find Mira kneeling over him in the forest. In that short time, the wound on his side had closed to a thin pink scar, far faster than any human injury could have healed. He kept his shirt on more often now, careful not to let Mira see just how quickly his body was mending, though he suspected she already noticed more than she let on. Far to the north, in the stone halls of the pack stronghold, a very different scene was unfolding. Bram, the beta who had once stood loyally at Kale's side, now sat in the Alpha's own chair, his boots resting on the polished table where treaties and territory maps had once been discussed. Around him, a circle of loyal wolves waited for his orders, their expressions a mixture of ambition and unease. The king is dead, Bram announced to the gathered council, his voice carrying false confidence. Struck down by rogue wolves near the human border. A tragedy, but the pack must move forward. An older wolf named Garrick, one of the few who had served under Kale's father before him, narrowed his eyes. Where is the body then? A death of an alpha should be marked, honored, confirmed before the entire pack. Why do we only have your word? The rogues scattered his remains before we could recover them properly, Bram said smoothly, though a flicker of irritation crossed his face at being questioned. It was a brutal attack. I barely escaped with my own life. Garrick said nothing further, but his eyes remained sharp with suspicion. He had known Kale since the boy was young, had watched him grow into a fair and capable leader, nothing like the cruel figure now occupying his chair. Something about Bram's story did not sit right, but proving a lie required evidence, and evidence was exactly what Bram had made certain to erase. With the king gone, Bram continued, addressing the room, the pack requires new leadership. As beta, the responsibility falls to me until proper succession can be arranged. Murmurs rippled through the gathered wolves. Some nodded in agreement, eager for stability, for someone to fill the sudden void of power. Others, like Garrick, exchanged uneasy glances, unwilling to voice their doubts openly, in a room now controlled by a man they no longer trusted. Bram smiled thinly, satisfied with the reaction. He had spent months laying the groundwork for this moment, whispering doubts about Cale's leadership into the right ears, forging alliances with wolves hungry for more power than their positions currently allowed. The attack in the forest had been the final piece, meant to eliminate Cale entirely. The fact that his body had not been recovered nagged at Bram more than he cared to admit, but he pushed the worry aside. No human could survive an attack meant for an Alpha King. Cale was almost certainly dead, bleeding out somewhere in the forest, his body already claimed by scavengers. Almost certainly was not the same as certainly, and that small crack of doubt would prove costly in the days ahead. Back in the small shack at the edge of the village, Mira busied herself repairing a hole in the roof while Cale watched from below, offering directions since his side still ached too much for climbing. "A little to the left," he called up. "No, your left, not mine." Mira laughed, adjusting the loose board she was hammering into place. "You're surprisingly bossy for someone flat on his back giving orders." "Old habit," Cale admitted, a rare smile crossing his face. "I'm used to people listening when I speak." "Well, out here, you're just Cale, the injured traveler," Mira said, climbing down from the small ladder once the repair was finished. "Nobody's listening to your orders except me, and only because I feel like it." "Fair enough," Cale said, watching her wipe dust from her hands onto her worn dress. "Though I have to admit, you've been more patient with me than most people back home ever are." "Maybe your home just needs kinder people in it," Mira said simply, sitting down across from him. "Tell me about it. Your home, I mean. What's it like, being what you are?" Cale considered the question carefully. He had not spoken about his life, his true life, with anyone outside the pack in longer than he could remember. But something about Mira's open curiosity, free of judgment, made the words come easier than he expected. "It's beautiful," he admitted. "Mountains, forests that stretch for days, lakes so clear you can see straight to the bottom. But it's also demanding. Every relationship is built on strength, on usefulness, on rank. Kindness for its own sake is rare there. People help each other because it benefits them, not simply because it's the right thing to do." "That sounds lonely," Mira said quietly. "It is," Cale admitted, surprised by how easily the truth slipped out. "I never realized how lonely until now." Mira did not press further, sensing the weight behind his words. Instead, she reached for the small basket of berries she had gathered that morning and offered him a handful. "Well, for however long you're stuck here, you don't have to worry about rank or usefulness. You can just be a person recovering from an injury, eating berries with someone who talks too much." Cale laughed, a genuine warm sound that seemed to surprise even himself. "I don't mind the talking." They sat together as the afternoon sun climbed higher, sharing berries and easy conversation, the kind of comfortable silence and gentle laughter that neither of them had experienced in a long time. For Mira, it was a rare reprieve from the constant grinding worry of survival. For Cale, it was something even rarer, a glimpse of what life might feel like without the weight of a crown pressing down on every decision. Their peace was interrupted by the distant sound of hoofbeats approaching the village, followed by raised voices near the main road. Mira stood quickly, moving to the small window to peer out. "Riders," she said, frowning. "Village doesn't usually get riders unless something's wrong." Cale rose despite the twinge in his side, joining her at the window. Through the gap in the wood, he watched several armed men on horseback stop near the village center, questioning the gathered townspeople. Even from this distance, he recognized the crest on their tunics. Wolves in service to the pack, though not wolves he recognized personally. "They're searching for something," Cale murmured, tension creeping into his voice. "Or someone," Mira said, glancing at him with growing concern. Cale's expression darkened. If Bram had sent scouts into human territory, it meant the Beta was not fully convinced of his death. It meant hunters would keep searching until they found proof, one way or another. And if they found him here, in Mira's home, the danger would extend far beyond himself. "I need to see what they want," Cale said, moving toward the door. "Absolutely not," Mira said, grabbing his arm. "You're still recovering, and if those men are looking for you like you think they are, showing yourself is the worst thing you could do. If they're searching the village, they might question everyone here, including you," Cale argued. "I won't let you get pulled into danger because of me." "I'm already pulled into it," Mira said firmly. "I have been since the moment I found you bleeding in the forest. Running out there half-healed isn't protecting me. It's putting both of us at greater risk. Let me go see what's happening. I'm just a village girl to them. They won't look twice at me." Kale hesitated, torn between his instinct to protect and the practical truth in her words. Finally, reluctantly, he nodded. "Be careful." Mira slipped a worn shawl over her shoulders and stepped outside, walking casually toward the village center as though drawn by simple curiosity like any other resident. She kept her expression neutral, her posture unassuming, blending into the small crowd that had gathered around the riders. "We're looking for a man," one of the riders was saying, his voice carrying easily over the murmurs of the crowd. "Injured, possibly disoriented. Answers to no name we know of. Anyone seen a stranger matching that description?" The villagers shook their heads, murmuring their ignorance, though a few glanced nervously toward the edge of town, toward the direction of Mira's shack. She kept her face carefully blank, forcing herself to breathe normally despite the hammering of her heart. "No strangers here," old Ferris spoke up from near the bakery, his tone even and unbothered. "Quiet village, this one. Nothing much happens." The rider studied the crowd a moment longer before nodding curtly. "If anyone sees such a man, report to the northern outpost immediately. There's a reward for information." With that, the riders turned their horses and continued down the road, moving toward the next village along their search route. Mira exhaled slowly, relief washing through her as the danger passed for now. She waited until the riders were well out of sight before slipping back through the village toward her shack, her mind racing with the implications of what she had just witnessed. Whoever was searching for Kale was serious, organized, and willing to offer rewards for information. This was no small conflict between rivals. This was something far larger. She found Kale pacing anxiously near the window when she returned, relief flooding his features the moment she stepped through the door. "They're gone," she said, closing the door behind her. "For now. But Kale, they offered a reward for information about you. This isn't just some personal disagreement, is it?" Gale's expression turned grave. "No, it's much more than that." "Then you need to tell me everything," Mira said, sitting down across from him, her earlier hesitance replaced by firm resolve. "If I'm going to keep protecting you, if keep this secret, I need to understand exactly what I'm protecting you from." Kale studied her for a long moment, weighing the risk of full honesty against the danger of continued secrecy. Finally he nodded, understanding that Mira deserved the truth, deserved to know exactly what kind of storm she had unknowingly walked into the moment she offered a stranger her last piece of bread. "My name isn't just Kale," he began quietly. "I'm the Alpha King of the Northern Pax, and 3 nights ago, my own beta tried to have me killed." The words hung in the air between them, heavier than anything Mira had ever heard spoken inside these thin wooden walls. Alpha King. The title alone carried weight she could barely comprehend. Stories she had grown up hearing whispered around fires, tales of power strong enough to shape entire territories. And this man, the one who had eaten her last piece of bread with trembling, grateful hands, was the very center of those legends. "You're the king," she repeated slowly, as though saying it aloud might make it easier to believe. "The actual ruler of the Northern Pax." "Yes," Kale said, watching her carefully, searching her face for the fear he expected, the distance he braced himself to see forming between them. Instead, Mira simply frowned, processing the information with the same practical steadiness she approached everything else in her difficult life. "That explains a lot, actually. The healing, the way you spoke when you thought I wasn't paying attention. Even how you carry yourself despite being half-starved and injured. I should have guessed sooner." "You're not afraid?" Kale asked, genuinely surprised. "Should I be?" Mira countered. "You already told me you'd never hurt me. I believed you then. I still believe you now. A title doesn't change who you've shown yourself to be over these past few days." Kale felt something shift inside his chest, a warmth he had rarely experienced even among his own people. Throughout his entire life, everyone who learned his identity treated him differently immediately afterward, with excessive deference, careful calculation, or barely hidden ambition. Mira's reaction, calm acceptance paired with continued honesty, felt like nothing he had ever known. "Tell me about your beta," Mira said, settling into the conversation with the same directness she brought to everything else. "Bram, was it? Why would he turn against you?" Kale exhaled slowly, gathering his thoughts. "Bram has always craved more power than his position allowed. I trusted him because his father served my father loyally for decades, and I assumed that loyalty would pass down naturally. I was wrong. Looking back now, I can see the signs I ignored, the way he questioned my decisions in private council meetings, the alliances he built with wolves who resented my leadership. What happens now?" Mira asked. "If he believes you're dead, what does that mean for your kingdom?" It means he'll try to consolidate power quickly, before anyone can question his claim to leadership, Kale said grimly. The pack requires proof of an alpha's death for a formal transfer of power, but if enough time passes without my return, uncertainty alone might be enough for him to seize control regardless. Then you need to go back, Mira said. Prove you're alive. Stop him before it's too late. Not yet, Kale said firmly. I'm not strong enough to face him directly, and going back too soon, before I understand the full scope of his support within the pack, could get me killed for certain this time. I need to heal fully first, and I need information about who remains loyal to me before I make any move. Mira nodded slowly, understanding the careful strategy behind his hesitation, though worry lingered in her expression. Those riders today, the reward for information, that's just the beginning, isn't it? They'll keep searching. Yes, Kale admitted. And the longer I stay here, the greater the risk to you. I meant what I said before. I don't want to endanger you because of my own troubles. And I meant what I said, Mira replied firmly. You're staying until you're strong enough to face this properly. We'll just need to be more careful. Over the following days, their routine adjusted to accommodate the growing danger. Mira began varying her paths through the village, avoiding patterns that might draw attention, while Kale stayed hidden inside during daylight hours, venturing outside only under cover of darkness, to slowly rebuild his strength through careful exercise in the small clearing behind the shack. Despite the underlying tension, their bond continued to deepen through the shared challenge. Kale found himself looking forward to the quiet evenings they spent together, trading stories, Mira describing the small joys she found in village life despite its hardships, Kale sharing memories of his childhood before the weight of leadership settled fully onto his shoulders. My mother used to tell me stories about the old alphas, Kale said one evening, as they sat together watching the sunset through the small window. Leaders who ruled not through fear, but through genuine care for their people. I used to believe I could be that kind of leader. What changed? Mira asked gently. Reality, Kale said with a rueful smile. The pressures of maintaining order, of managing rivalries between territories, of proving strength to wolves who only respect strength. Somewhere along the way, I stopped asking whether my decisions were kind and started only asking whether they were effective. Maybe you can be both, Mira suggested. Effective and kind aren't opposites, not really. Sometimes the kindest choice is also the strongest one, even if it doesn't look that way at first glance. Kale considered her words carefully, struck again by the simple wisdom she offered without any formal education, any political training, simply drawn from her own experience surviving in a world that had shown her very little mercy. You'd make a fine advisor, he said with a small smile. I'd make a terrible advisor, Mira laughed. I have no idea how politics work, and I'd probably insult important people by accident within the first hour. I don't know, Kale said, watching her with an expression that had grown warmer over the past days. I think you understand people better than most advisors I've ever had. You just don't dress it up in fancy language. Their conversation was interrupted by a soft rustling sound outside the shack, followed by the distinct snap of a branch breaking underfoot. Kale's entire body tensed immediately, years of instinct sharpening his senses despite his still healing wound. Someone's outside, he whispered, motioning for Mira to stay low and quiet. She nodded, moving silently to extinguish the small candle, plunging the room into darkness broken only by faint moonlight filtering through the cracks in the walls. Kale moved toward the door, positioning himself protectively between Mira and whatever waited outside. Another sound followed, closer this time, unmistakably the careful, deliberate footsteps of something moving through the underbrush surrounding the shack. Kale's eyes narrowed, his senses straining to identify the source. Not human footsteps, something heavier, something that carried the faint, distinctive scent he recognized immediately. Wolf. Stay behind me, he whispered to Mira, his voice barely audible. No matter what happens, don't come out from behind me. Mira's heart pounded as she pressed herself against the wall, watching Kale's silhouette tense in the darkness, every muscle coiled and ready despite his incomplete recovery. The footsteps circled closer, moving with the patient, calculated movement of a predator confirming its target before striking. A low growl finally broke the silence outside, followed by a voice, rough and unfamiliar, calling out into the night. I know you're in there, Kale. Did you really think you could hide from us forever? Kale's blood ran cold at the voice. He recognized it immediately. A wolf named Colin, one of Bram's most loyal enforcers. Someone who had once served alongside him, but had clearly chosen a different allegiance in the aftermath of the ambush. Colin, Kale called back, his voice carrying the commanding authority Mira had heard only faintly hints of before now. I'd hoped you had more honor than to serve a traitor. A humorless laugh answered him from the darkness. Honor doesn't feed a family, old friend. Bram promised advancement to those who bring proof of your death. I'm afraid I intend to collect on that promise. Inside the shack, Mira's hands trembled, though she forced herself to remain still and silent as instructed. Kale's expression hardened into something she had not seen before. The true face of the Alpha King finally emerging beneath the gentle traveler she had come to know over the past days. You'll have to get through me first, Kale said quietly, positioning himself firmly between the door and Mira, ready to face whatever danger the night had brought to their doorstep. Outside, the growling intensified, joined now by the sound of at least 2 more sets of footsteps circling the small shack, closing in from multiple directions. Whatever happened next would test not only Kale's healing body, but the fragile safety of the small world he and Mira had built together over these past precious days. The first attack came fast, a heavy body slamming against the shack's door with enough force to splinter the old wood along its frame. Mira gasped, pressing herself deeper against the wall as Kale braced his shoulder against the door, holding it closed against the renewed assault from outside. There are at least 3 of them, Kale said through gritted teeth, straining against another impact. Colin brought reinforcements. What do we do? Mira whispered, fear finally breaking through her earlier composure. You run, Kale said firmly. The moment this door gives way, you run toward the village. Don't look back. Don't wait for me. I'm not leaving you, Mira said, her voice trembling but resolute. Mira, please. Whatever argument Kale intended to make was cut short as the door finally splintered completely, sending broken pieces of wood scattering across the floor. A massive gray wolf lunged through the opening, teeth bared, eyes gleaming with predatory focus in the moonlight. Kale moved instantly, shifting his body to intercept the attack before it could reach Mira, his own transformation beginning in a blur of motion that seemed to bend the very air around him. Where a wounded man had stood moments before, a powerful dark wolf now met the attacker head-on, the 2 forms colliding with a force that shook the small shack's remaining walls. Mira pressed her hands over her mouth to stifle a scream, watching in stunned disbelief as Kale, her Kale, fought with a ferocity and skill that left no doubt about the truth of his identity. The battle spilled outside, as Kale forced his attacker back through the broken doorway, giving Mira a narrow window to consider her options. 2 more shapes circled at the edge of the clearing, waiting for an opening, their attention split between the fight and the small shack that still held potential prey. Mira's mind raced. Running now, as Kale had instructed, meant leaving him to face 3 opponents alone, while still recovering from his previous injuries. But staying meant risking becoming a liability, a distraction that could cost him the fight entirely. She grabbed the only weapon within reach, an old iron poker used for stirring the stove's coals, and moved cautiously toward the doorway, watching for any opportunity to help without becoming a burden. Outside, Kale fought with desperate intensity, his wolf form moving with practiced skill despite the lingering weakness in his side. He drove Colin's ally back with a series of swift strikes, but the 2 remaining wolves seized the moment to circle wider, splitting their approach to overwhelm him from multiple directions. Kale, Mira's voice cut through the chaos as she spotted one of the wolves shifting its path toward the shack's side, clearly intending to circle around and reach her directly, while Kale remained occupied with the others. Kale's head snapped toward the sound, understanding immediately what the maneuver intended. With a burst of desperate speed, he abandoned his current engagement to intercept the wolf moving toward Mira, tackling it hard enough to send both tumbling across the clearing in a tangle of snarling limbs. This left an opening that Colin, watching from the shadows, immediately exploited. He lunged toward the shack himself, teeth bared, moving directly toward the doorway where Mira stood frozen, with the iron poker gripped tightly in her trembling hands. Every instinct told her to run, to flee back into the darkness of the shack and hope for safety within its broken walls. But something stronger held her ground, the same instinct that had made her share her last piece of bread with a dying stranger days before. She raised the poker, planting her feet firmly, prepared to fight despite the impossible odds against her. Colin's charge faltered slightly at the sight of a human standing her ground rather than fleeing, a brief moment of confusion that proved costly. Kale, having subdued his previous opponent with a decisive strike, turned just in time to see the danger closing in on Mira. With a roar that seemed to shake the very trees around them, he launched himself across the clearing, intercepting Colin's attack a mere breath before it could reach her. The impact sent both wolves crashing to the ground in a violent tumble, Kale's larger, more powerful form quickly gaining the advantage despite his injuries. Colin struggled beneath him, snarling and thrashing, but Kale's grip held firm, his teeth finding purchase against Colin's throat in a clear position of dominance that left no question about the outcome should he choose to press further. "Yield," Kale's voice growled, low and commanding even in his wolf form, the words somehow carrying clearly despite the transformation. "Yield, and I might consider mercy for your betrayal." Colin's body went still beneath him, the fight draining from his posture as he recognized the absolute authority in Kale's tone, the unmistakable presence of an alpha asserting dominance over a subordinate who had strayed too far. "I yield," he gasped out. "Please, I yield." Kale held the position a moment longer, ensuring the surrender was genuine, before finally releasing his hold and stepping back. The other two wolves, having witnessed their leader's swift defeat, made no move to continue the fight, instead backing away slowly into the tree line, clearly reconsidering the wisdom of their attack. "Tell Bram," Kale said, his wolf form shifting back into his human shape as he spoke, breathing hard from the exertion, "that I am very much alive, and that his betrayal will not go unanswered." Colin scrambled backward, fear evident in every line of his body, before turning and fleeing into the darkness alongside his companions, leaving Kale standing alone in the moonlit clearing, breathing heavily, blood seeping fresh from where his healing wound had reopened during the fight. Mira rushed forward the moment the danger passed, dropping the iron poker to wrap her arms around him before he could even fully catch his breath. "You're hurt," she said, examining the fresh blood staining his side. "We need to get you back inside." "I'm fine," Kale insisted, though his legs wavered slightly beneath him from the combined strain of the fight and his still incomplete recovery. "You are not fine," Mira said firmly, guiding him back toward the damaged doorway of the shack. "Stubborn Alpha King or not, you're going to sit down and let me look at that wound properly." Despite the pain and exhaustion, Kale found himself smiling faintly at her tone, the same firm, no-nonsense care she had shown him from the very first night they met. He allowed her to guide him back inside, settling onto the cot while she gathered what few supplies remained to clean and rebandage the reopened injury. "You could have run," Kale said quietly as she worked. "When I told you to, you should have run." "I told you already," Mira said without looking up from her careful work. "I'm not the type to run when someone I care about is in danger." The words hung between them, simple, but weighted with meaning. Neither of them had quite spoken aloud before. Kale studied her face in the dim candlelight, searching for any sign of regret or fear, following the revelation of exactly what kind of danger she had chosen to remain part of. He found none, only the same steady, unwavering care that had defined every moment since she found him bleeding in the forest. "Mira," he said softly, reaching to gently catch her hand as she finished tying off the fresh bandage. "I need you to understand something. What happened tonight, it's only the beginning. Bram won't stop sending wolves after me, and now that they've seen that you're willing to fight for me, you've become a target too." "I understood that the moment you told me who you were," Mira said, meeting his gaze steadily. "I made my choice then. I'm not changing my mind now just because things got dangerous." Kale's fingers tightened gently around hers. "Then we need a plan. I can't keep hiding here indefinitely, waiting for the next attack to find us. I need to reach the wolves I know remain loyal to me, gather support before Bram consolidates his power completely. Then we'll find a way to reach them," Mira said simply. Together. Outside, the forest had fallen quiet once more, the immediate danger past for now, though both of them understood clearly that tonight's attack marked only the beginning of a much larger conflict still waiting to unfold. Somewhere beyond the tree line, Colin would carry word back to Bram that the king they believed dead remained very much alive, setting in motion events that would soon draw Mira far beyond the safety of her small, broken shack and into the very heart of a kingdom's struggle for its rightful throne. They left the shack 2 days later, once Kale's strength had returned enough to travel steadily, though the fresh scar along his side still ached with each stride through the dense forest. Mira carried a small bundle containing what little food she could gather, along with a worn cloak that had once belonged to her mother, the only possession of any real value she owned. "Are you certain about this?" Kale asked as they moved carefully through the trees, avoiding the main roads where Bram's scouts might still be watching. "Once we cross into pack territory, there's no easy way back to the life you knew. I stopped being certain about anything comfortable the night I found you bleeding in the forest," Mira said with a small, wry smile. "Might as well see this through properly now." Their destination was a hidden outpost, deep within the northern mountains, a place Kale knew housed a small contingent of wolves who had served under his father before him, wolves whose loyalty predated Bram's rise to influence within the pack. If anyone remained willing to challenge the Beta's false claim to leadership, it would be found among these old, weathered fighters, who valued honor above ambition. The journey proved harder than either had anticipated. The terrain grew steeper as they moved deeper into wolf territory, rocky paths winding through dense forest that blocked most sunlight from reaching the ground below. Mira struggled to keep pace at times, her body still recovering from years of insufficient nourishment, though she refused every offer Kale made to slow down or rest more frequently than necessary. "You don't have to prove anything to me," Kale said gently during one particularly difficult climb, noticing the way her breath came in short, labored gasps. "We can rest if you need to." "I'm fine," Mira insisted, though her legs trembled slightly with the effort. "We're closer to danger the longer we stay exposed out here. Better to keep moving." Despite her protests, Kale called a halt near a small stream, insisting they refill their water and rest properly before continuing. He watched with quiet concern as Mira sat heavily against a large rock, her exhaustion finally becoming impossible to hide entirely. "When this is over," he said, settling beside her, "when Bram is dealt with and my throne is secure again, you'll never have to worry about hunger or exhaustion like this again. I promise you that." Mira glanced at him, surprised by the weight of conviction in his voice. "You don't need to make promises about my future, Kale. Helping you doesn't come with conditions." "I know," Kale said softly, "but I want to make that promise anyway. You've given me more genuine care in a handful of days than most people offer in a lifetime. Whatever happens with my throne, I intend to make certain you never go hungry again." Something warm flickered in Mira's chest at his words, though she quickly pushed the feeling aside, focusing instead on the practical matter of catching her breath before they continued their difficult journey toward the mountain outpost. They resumed traveling as the sun began its slow descent toward the horizon, the shadows lengthening across the forest floor as they pushed onward. It was nearly dusk when Kale suddenly stopped, his body tensing as his senses picked up on something Mira could not yet detect. "Someone's approaching," he said quietly, positioning himself protectively in front of her once more. Multiple someones. Mira's heart raced as she peered past him into the gathering darkness, catching glimpses of movement between the trees ahead. Her hand instinctively found the small knife she had brought along for protection, though she knew it would offer little defense against wolves should this encounter turn hostile. A figure emerged from the shadows first, an older man with silver-streaked hair and sharp, assessing eyes that immediately widened with recognition the moment they landed on Kale. "Your Majesty," he breathed, dropping immediately to one knee in a gesture of deep respect. "We had heard rumors, whispers that you survived, but I hardly dared believe them true." "Garrick," Kale said, relief evident in his voice as he recognized the loyal wolf who had served his father for decades. "You came looking for me?" "The moment word reached us that Bram claimed your death without proof, several of us grew suspicious," Garrick said, rising back to his feet, his gaze flicking curiously toward Mira before returning respectfully to Kale. "We've been searching the border territories for any sign of your survival ever since." "Bram has already sent wolves to eliminate me," Kale said grimly. "We were attacked just 2 nights ago near the human village where I've been recovering." Garrick's expression darkened considerably. "Then the situation is worse than even our worst suspicions suggested. Bram has already begun reorganizing pack leadership, replacing loyal commanders with those who support his claim. If he consolidates full control before your return, reclaiming your throne will become significantly more difficult." "How many remain loyal to me?" Kale asked urgently. "More than Bram realizes," Garrick said with a grim smile. "But fewer than we would like, given how effectively he's isolated dissenting voices within the council. We need to move carefully. Gather support quietly, before revealing your survival too widely." Kale nodded, understanding the delicate strategy required. He glanced briefly toward Mira, who stood quietly observing the exchange, clearly aware that the conversation had shifted into territory far removed from the simple, quiet life they had shared over the past days. "This is Mira," Kale said, introducing her properly to Garrick. "She saved my life after the ambush and has protected me ever since, at considerable risk to her own safety." Garrick studied Mira with newfound interest, his earlier caution shifting into something closer to respect. "Then the pack owes you a debt of gratitude, young lady. Not many humans would risk themselves so thoroughly for a wounded stranger, let alone one who turned out to carry such weighty responsibilities." "I didn't know who he was when I helped him," Mira said honestly. "I just knew someone needed help." "Perhaps that makes your kindness all the more genuine," Garrick observed thoughtfully. "Come, both of you. It isn't safe to linger here in the open. Our outpost isn't far, and you'll both need proper rest and protection before we can discuss the path forward." They followed Garrick through the darkening forest, the path growing steadily steeper as they climbed higher into the mountains. Eventually, hidden cleverly within a natural rock formation that provided both shelter and defensive advantage, they reached a small but well-fortified outpost, home to perhaps a dozen wolves who greeted Kale's arrival with expressions ranging from cautious hope to genuine relief. That night, gathered around a modest fire within the outpost's main chamber, Kale and Garrick discussed strategy late into the evening, while Mira listened quietly from a corner, absorbing details about pack politics and alliances that felt overwhelming in their complexity, compared to the simple survival concerns that had previously dominated her entire existence. "We'll need proof of Bram's betrayal that the full council cannot ignore," Garrick was saying. "Suspicion alone won't be enough to challenge his claim, not when he's already secured support from several key territories." "What kind of proof would satisfy the council?" Kale asked. "Witnesses willing to testify against him, evidence of the ambush being deliberately orchestrated rather than a random attack by rogue wolves," Garrick explained. "Colin, the wolf who attacked you at the human village, if we could convince him to testify against Bram in exchange for leniency, that alone might turn enough council members against the Beta's claim." Kale considered this carefully. Colin fled after our encounter, humiliated by his defeat and likely fearful of Bram's reaction to his failure. He might be more receptive to an alternative arrangement than we initially assumed. "Then finding him becomes our priority," Garrick said, along with continuing to gather support among the council members who still harbor doubts about Bram's leadership. As the discussion continued, Mira found herself increasingly aware of just how far she had traveled from her simple existence at the edge of a human village. The weight of what lay ahead, political maneuvering, potential conflict, the very real possibility that this entire struggle could end in violence, settled heavily in her chest even as she remained determined to see it through beside Kale. Later that night, as the outpost settled into quiet, and most of the wolves retired to rest, Kale found Mira sitting alone near the entrance, staring out at the star-filled sky stretching above the mountain peaks. "You've grown quiet," he said, settling beside her. "Just thinking," Mira admitted, "about how different this world is from anything I've known. Politics, alliances, the weight of an entire kingdom's future resting on witness testimonies and council votes. It's a lot to take in." "You don't have to be part of this," Kale said gently, though the words clearly cost him something to speak aloud. "If you wanted to return to the village, to your old life, I would understand completely." Mira turned to look at him, studying the uncertainty hidden beneath his careful words. "Do you want me to leave?" "No," Kale admitted immediately, honestly. "I want you here more than I've wanted anything in longer than I can remember, but I also don't want to trap you in a life you never chose, surrounded by dangers that were never truly yours to carry. I chose this, the moment I offered you that bread," Mira said softly. "Every step since then has been my choice too. I'm not leaving, Kale. Not now. Not when things are just getting complicated." Kale reached for her hand in the darkness, his fingers intertwining gently with hers. "Then we'll face whatever comes next together." Above them, the stars continued their slow, silent journey across the night sky, indifferent to the storm of politics and danger gathering below, unaware that the choices made in the coming days would determine not only the fate of a kingdom, but the fate of a bond between two people who had found something rare and precious in each other, amid circumstances neither could have ever predicted. 3 scouts left the outpost at dawn to track Colin's whereabouts, following the faint trail he had left during his hasty retreat from the human village. Kale wanted to join the search personally, but Garrick convinced him to remain hidden at the outpost a little longer, arguing that his continued survival needed to remain concealed until they had gathered enough support to challenge Bram directly. "Every day you stay hidden is another day Bram tightens his grip," Kale argued during their morning discussion, frustration evident in his voice. "I should be out there, not sitting here while others take the risks on my behalf." "Your value lies in staying alive until the right moment," Garrick countered patiently. "A king who reveals himself too soon, without sufficient support to protect his claim, is a king who hands Bram every advantage. Patience now prevents disaster later." Mira watched the exchange quietly, understanding the wisdom in Garrick's caution even as she recognized the difficulty Kale faced in accepting a passive role while his kingdom hung in uncertain balance. She found herself drawn increasingly into the daily rhythms of the outpost, helping prepare meals for the gathered wolves, tending to minor injuries among the fighters, finding small ways to contribute despite her unfamiliarity with pack customs and politics. "You've settled in remarkably well," Garrick observed one afternoon, watching her efficiently redress a scout's minor wound, with the same practiced care she had once shown Kale in her small shack. "Most humans find our ways unsettling, at best. I've never had the luxury of being unsettled by much," Mira replied honestly. "When you spend your whole life just trying to survive, you learn to adapt quickly to whatever situation you find yourself in." "A useful trait," Garrick said thoughtfully, "one that seems to have served our king well these past days, though I suspect his gratitude toward you extends well beyond mere usefulness." Mira felt heat rise in her cheeks at the implication, though she said nothing in response, focusing instead on finishing the bandage she was applying. Garrick smiled knowingly but did not press further, returning his attention to strategic matters instead. That evening, the scouts returned with news that sent a ripple of urgency through the outpost. Colin had been located, hiding in a remote cabin roughly half a day's journey from their current position, apparently fearful of both Bram's potential punishment for his failure and any retaliation Cale might seek for the attack. "He's isolated, no other wolves nearby," one scout reported. "Seems genuinely frightened, jumping at every sound according to what we observed from a distance." "Then this is our opportunity," Garrick said, turning to Cale. "Fear can make a man reconsider his loyalties quite thoroughly. If we approach him carefully, offer protection in exchange for testimony against Bram, we might secure exactly the evidence we need." "I want to be part of this," Cale said firmly, leaving no room for argument this time. "Colin needs to see me alive, understand clearly that his choice now determines whether he faces justice or opportunity." Garrick considered the request, finally nodding in agreement. "Very well, but we move carefully, and you follow my guidance on how we approach him. This needs to feel like an offer, not a threat, if we want genuine cooperation rather than desperate lies." Mira insisted on accompanying the group despite Cale's initial hesitation, arguing that her presence had already proven valuable in de-escalating tense situations, and that Colin might respond more openly with a human witness present who carried no obvious threat. They set out before dawn the following morning, moving carefully through unfamiliar terrain toward the remote cabin where Colin remained hidden. The journey passed largely in tense silence, each member of the small group focused on the delicate mission ahead and the significant risks it carried should their approach fail to secure the cooperation they desperately needed. The cabin came into view as afternoon light filtered through the surrounding trees, a small, weathered structure that showed clear signs of hasty, temporary habitation. Garrick raised a hand, signaling the group to halt while he assessed the situation more carefully. "No obvious guards," he murmured. "He's truly alone out here, just as the scouts reported." Cale stepped forward despite the lingering caution in Garrick's expression, moving toward the cabin with measured, deliberate steps. "Colin," he called out, his voice carrying clearly through the quiet forest. "I know you're inside. I've come to talk, not to seek revenge for what happened." A long silence followed, broken finally by the sound of movement inside the cabin, followed by the door creaking open, just enough to reveal Colin's wary face peering out at the gathered group. "Your Majesty," he said, his voice trembling slightly. "I assumed you'd come for justice, considering what happened between us." "I've come for the truth," Cale said steadily, "about what really happened the night I was ambushed, and about Bram's role in orchestrating that attack. Cooperation now could mean the difference between facing consequences as a reluctant participant or facing them as an unrepentant traitor." Colin's eyes darted nervously between Cale and the others gathered behind him, clearly weighing his limited options. "If I tell you everything, testify against Bram before the full council, what happens to me?" "Leniency," Garrick said, stepping forward to join the conversation. "Given voluntarily, before further harm comes to anyone else. The king is not interested in unnecessary bloodshed among those who can still serve the pack honorably going forward." Colin's shoulders sagged slightly, exhaustion and fear finally overcoming his earlier defensiveness. He opened the door wider, gesturing for them to enter the small cabin. "Bram approached me nearly 2 months ago," he began, his voice steadying gradually as he committed to full honesty. "Promised advancement, better territory, if I helped arrange an ambush that would appear as though rogue wolves acted alone. He wanted the king eliminated cleanly, without any trail leading back to him directly." Mira listened carefully from near the doorway, watching Cale's expression harden with each detail Colin revealed, confirming suspicions that had clearly haunted him since the night of the attack. The full scope of Bram's betrayal, planned months in advance, involving careful manipulation of multiple wolves within the pack, painted a picture far more calculated and dangerous than a simple opportunistic power grab. "Would you testify to this before the full council?" Cale asked once Colin finished his account. "Formally, with the understanding that your cooperation now determines your future standing within the pack?" Colin hesitated only briefly before nodding. "Yes, I'll testify. I never truly wanted this, Your Majesty. Bram's promises seemed appealing at the time, but I've had nothing but regret since that night, especially after our encounter at the human village. Watching you fight to protect someone innocent, someone with no stake in pack politics whatsoever, made me realize exactly what kind of leader I had betrayed." Cale studied him for a long moment, weighing the sincerity behind his words. "Very well. We'll arrange safe passage for you to the main stronghold, under Garrick's protection. where you'll present your testimony before the council directly." Relief flooded through Colin's expression, mixed still with lingering guilt over his previous actions. "Thank you, Your Majesty. I won't forget this mercy." As they prepared to depart the cabin, Colin's expression suddenly shifted, alarm flickering across his features. "Wait," he said urgently. "Bram doesn't trust easily. If he suspects I've been located, he may have already sent others to silence me before I can testify. We should move quickly and carefully." The warning proved prophetic. As they emerged from the cabin, preparing for the journey back toward the mountain outpost, a low growl rippled through the surrounding trees, followed immediately by the sound of multiple bodies moving swiftly through the underbrush, closing in from several directions at once. "Ambush," Garrick snarled, immediately positioning himself protectively. Bram must have anticipated we might find him. Cale's body tensed, already shifting into his wolf form as the first attacker burst from the tree line, teeth bared, and clearly intent on eliminating Colin before he could reach safety. Mira found herself pulled backward by one of the loyal scouts, shielded from the chaos erupting around the small clearing, as wolves collided in fierce, desperate combat. The fight that followed proved brutal and swift. Cale's forces working in coordinated defense against Bram's assassins, each side understanding clearly that the outcome of this single confrontation could dramatically alter the balance of power still hanging precariously in the days ahead. Colin, despite his earlier fear, fought alongside them with surprising ferocity, apparently determined to prove his renewed loyalty through decisive action rather than mere words. When the dust finally settled, 3 of Bram's assassins lay defeated, while the 4th fled back into the forest, undoubtedly to report the failed mission back to his master. Cale, breathing hard but otherwise unharmed, shifted back to his human form, immediately searching the clearing for any sign that Mira had been caught in the chaos. "I'm here," she called out, emerging from behind the scout who had shielded her throughout the confrontation. "I'm fine." Relief flooded through Cale's features as he crossed the clearing quickly, pulling her into a brief, fierce embrace before stepping back to assess the aftermath properly. "We need to move immediately," he said, addressing the group. "Bram will know his assassins failed soon enough, and he'll only grow more desperate and dangerous as his position weakens." Garrick nodded grimly in agreement. "Then let's not waste the advantage this failed attack has given us." With Colin's testimony secured and clear evidence of Bram's continued treachery, we have everything we need to challenge his claim before the full council. The group moved quickly, putting distance between themselves and the site of the confrontation, understanding clearly that the coming days would bring the conflict to its inevitable, decisive conclusion. Cale walked close beside Mira throughout the journey, his hand finding hers more than once along the difficult path, drawing strength from her steady presence even as the weight of reclaiming his throne pressed increasingly heavily upon him. The stronghold rose before them 2 days later, its stone towers stark against the gray morning sky, a sight that made Mira's breath catch despite the tension gripping the entire group. Cale had described his home during their long conversations at the shack, but nothing had prepared her for the sheer scale of it, the imposing walls that had stood for generations, home to a kingdom she was only beginning to understand. "The council convenes at midday," Garrick said as they approached the outer gates, disguised among a small merchant caravan that Garrick had arranged to grant them entry without raising immediate suspicion. Bram will be presiding, unaware that his authority is about to be challenged before witnesses he cannot easily dismiss. "And if he refuses to acknowledge Colin's testimony?" Mira asked quietly, walking close beside Cale as they moved through the bustling outer courtyard. "Then we present the evidence publicly, before enough council members and pack citizens that dismissal becomes impossible," Garrick said. "Bram has built his position on lies. Lies crumble quickly once enough light shines upon them." Cale remained mostly silent during the approach, his expression set with grim determination, the weight of reclaiming his rightful place pressing visibly upon his shoulders. Mira reached for his hand at one point, offering silent support, and felt his fingers tighten gratefully around hers in response. "Whatever happens in there," she said softly, "you're not facing it alone." "I know," Cale replied, meeting her gaze with something warm flickering beneath the tension. "That knowledge means more than you realize." They made their way toward the great hall where the council traditionally gathered, Garrick leading them through side passages known only to those who had served the stronghold for decades, avoiding the main routes where Bram's loyalists might recognize and intercept them before they reached their intended destination. The great hall itself proved as impressive as the exterior walls suggested, high vaulted ceilings supported by massive stone pillars, a long table at its center where council members already gathered, murmuring among themselves as they awaited the proceedings' formal start. Bram sat at the head of the table, wearing an expression of practiced authority that Mira recognized immediately as false confidence, The same careful performance she had seen countless times among desperate people trying to convince others of a strength they did not genuinely possess. Garrick signaled for the group to wait just outside the main entrance, timing their entrance carefully to maximize its impact upon the gathered council. As Bram began addressing the assembly, discussing matters of territory allocation as though his position remained entirely secure, Garrick gave the signal, and the group stepped forward into the great hall together. Silence fell instantly across the chamber as council members turned toward the entrance, their expressions shifting rapidly from confusion to shock as recognition dawned. Bram's careful composure shattered visibly, his face draining of color as he stared at Cale standing very much alive at the entrance to the hall he had claimed for his own. "This is impossible," Bram said, his voice cracking slightly despite his attempt to maintain composure. "You were killed. The reports confirmed it." "The reports were lies," Cale said, his voice carrying clearly and steadily across the silent hall. "Manufactured by a traitor, desperate to seize a throne that was never his to claim." Murmurs erupted throughout the assembled council as Cale strode forward, Mira, Garrick, and Colin following close behind him. Several council members rose immediately, relief and vindication evident on their faces, clearly among those who had harbored doubts about Bram's sudden rise to power. Others remained seated, their expressions guarded, clearly aligned too closely with Bram's interests to celebrate his sudden downfall. "These are baseless accusations," Bram said, attempting to rally his composure. "I saved this pack from chaos following your presumed death. Whatever grudge you're nursing over rumors and suspicion changes nothing about the leadership I've provided during this crisis." "Then perhaps you'd care to explain why Colin here can testify to your direct involvement in orchestrating the ambush meant to kill me," Cale said, gesturing toward Colin, who stepped forward despite his obvious nervousness at addressing the full council directly. Colin's testimony unfolded methodically, detailing the months of planning, the promises of advancement, the deliberate manufacturing of evidence pointing toward rogue wolves acting independently. As he spoke, the color continued draining from Bram's face, his earlier confidence crumbling entirely beneath the weight of irrefutable, detailed truth. "Lies," Bram sputtered, though the desperation in his voice undermined any conviction behind the word. "This wolf clearly seeks to save himself through fabricated accusations against his betters. The evidence extends beyond mere testimony," Garrick interjected calmly. "3 of your assassins attempted to silence Colin just 2 days ago, before he could reach this council. We defeated them in the process of protecting him. Their attempt to eliminate a witness speaks louder than any denial you might offer now." The hall fell into tense silence as council members absorbed the mounting evidence against Bram's leadership. Finally, an older wolf near the head of the table, one of the senior council members who had remained cautiously neutral throughout the proceedings, rose to speak. "The evidence presented here is substantial and damning," he said gravely. "Combined with the king's clear survival despite claims of his death, I see no legitimate path forward except to formally strip Bram of his position and restore rightful leadership to our true alpha." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the assembly, growing steadily louder as more council members voiced their support for the reversal. Bram, recognizing the tide turning decisively against him, made one final desperate attempt to salvage his position. "You would trust a human's presence in this hall over the leadership I've provided?" he snarled, his gaze finally landing on Mira, standing quietly near the entrance throughout the proceedings. "The king brings a human woman into our most sacred chamber, and you question my loyalty rather than his judgment?" "This human woman," Cale said, his voice sharpening with barely contained anger at the attempt to shift blame, "saved my life when I had nothing left to offer her, shared her last piece of food with a stranger she owed nothing, and fought alongside me against your assassins when she could have easily fled to safety. Her presence here honors this hall far more than your treachery has dishonored it." The council fell silent at the conviction behind Cale's words, several members exchanging glances that suggested growing respect for both his leadership and the character of the woman standing quietly beside him. Bram, recognizing the complete collapse of his position, attempted one final, desperate gambit. "If you believe this challenge holds merit," he said, forcing false confidence back into his tone, "then I demand a formal challenge, as tradition dictates. Let strength determine leadership, as our laws have always required." Cale's expression hardened at the proposal, understanding immediately the ancient tradition Bram invoked, a formal combat challenge that would settle the dispute through direct confrontation rather than continued deliberation. Such challenges, while rare, remained legally binding within pack law, and refusing one carried its own political consequences. "Very well," Cale said after a long moment of consideration. "I accept your challenge, Bram. Let this end as it should have from the beginning." with honest strength rather than cowardly betrayal. Mira's heart clenched with fear at the announcement, understanding clearly the danger such a formal combat challenge represented, even for someone as capable as Kale. She caught his arm briefly as the council began preparing the hall for the traditional confrontation, her eyes searching his face with obvious concern. "You don't have to do this," she whispered. "There must be another way." "There isn't," Kale said gently, though his own nervousness was evident beneath his calm exterior. "This is the only path that ends the conflict decisively, that leaves no doubt whatsoever about my rightful claim to leadership. I need to see this through." Mira nodded reluctantly, understanding the necessity even as fear gripped her chest. "Then win," she said firmly. "Whatever it takes, come back to me when this is finished." Kale's expression softened at her words, something warm and determined flickering behind his eyes. "I intend to," he said quietly, before turning to face the center of the great hall, where the formal combat circle had already been marked, and where Bram stood waiting, desperation and fading confidence mixing visibly across his features. The entire council gathered around the circle's edge, an air of tense anticipation settling over the great hall, as the two combatants prepared to determine, once and for all, who truly held rightful claim to the Northern Pack's throne. The combat circle grew silent as Kale and Bram faced each other across its marked boundary, the weight of the entire kingdom's future resting upon the outcome of what was about to unfold. Mira stood near Garrick at the circle's edge, her hands clenched tightly together, unable to fully mask the fear coursing through her despite her earlier attempt at calm reassurance. "He'll be fine," Garrick murmured beside her, though his own tense posture suggested he understood the genuine risk involved. Kale has trained for combat since childhood. Bram's ambition has always exceeded his actual fighting skill. "That's not entirely comforting," Mira admitted, watching as both combatants began the ritual transformation into their wolf forms, the air around them shimmering with the ancient power flowing through their bloodlines. Kale's transformation completed first, his dark wolf form radiating quiet confidence, despite the tension of the moment. Bram followed shortly after, his own form larger but somehow less controlled, betraying the desperation driving his actions, rather than genuine mastery of his abilities. The combat began with sudden, explosive speed, both wolves lunging simultaneously toward the circle's center, teeth and claws meeting in a fierce collision that sent gasps rippling through the gathered council. Mira watched with her heart in her throat as the two powerful creatures exchanged blows with terrifying speed, each strike carrying enough force to end the confrontation permanently should it land true. Bram fought with reckless aggression, clearly hoping to overwhelm Kale quickly before his opponent's still healing injuries could work against him. Kale, however, fought with the patient, controlled precision of someone who had genuinely trained for combat, rather than merely claiming false victories through political maneuvering. He absorbed Bram's initial aggressive assault, giving ground strategically while watching for the opening his opponent's desperation would inevitably create. That opening came several minutes into the confrontation, as Bram's exhaustion began overtaking his initial burst of aggressive energy. Kale seized the moment decisively, sidestepping a clumsy lunge and countering with a swift, calculated strike that sent Bram tumbling across the circle, momentarily stunned by the force of the blow. The crowd gasped collectively as Kale pressed his advantage, pinning Bram firmly to the ground in a clear position of absolute dominance, his teeth positioned dangerously close to his rival's exposed throat. The hall fell utterly silent, every witness understanding that this moment would determine not only Bram's fate, but the very future stability of the entire pack. "Yield," Kale's voice growled, carrying clearly despite his wolf form, "and perhaps this council will show mercy for your treachery. Continue resisting, and you'll receive the justice your betrayal has earned." For a long, tense moment, Bram remained silent, pride warring visibly with the obvious reality of his defeat. Finally, his body sagged beneath Kale's hold, the fight draining completely from his posture as he recognized the absolute futility of continued resistance. "I yield," he gasped out, the words carrying clear finality that echoed through the silent hall. "I yield to your rightful claim." Kale held the position a moment longer, ensuring the surrender was genuine, before finally releasing his hold and stepping back, allowing his own transformation to shift back into human form, as the assembled council erupted into a mixture of relieved cheers and murmured discussions about the implications of what they had just witnessed. "Bram," Kale said, addressing his defeated rival directly, as guards moved forward to formally restrain him, "your betrayal nearly cost this pack everything it stands for. You will face judgment before this full council for your crimes, judgment that will weigh both the severity of your treachery and whatever cooperation you offer in acknowledging your full wrongdoing." Bram, stripped of his earlier confidence entirely, nodded silently, understanding clearly that his fate now rested entirely in the hands of a council he had once believed thoroughly under his control. As guards led Bram away to await formal judgment, Kale turned immediately toward Mira, crossing the great hall in quick strides to reach her side. She met him halfway, relief flooding through her as she confirmed with her own eyes that he had emerged from the confrontation without serious injury. "You're safe," she breathed, reaching to touch his face gently, checking for any hidden wounds despite the obvious victory he had just secured. "I told you I would come back to you," Kale said softly, his hand covering hers where it rested against his cheek. "I meant it." The council, witnessing this tender moment between their newly reaffirmed king and the human woman who had clearly played such a pivotal role in his survival and eventual triumph, watched with expressions ranging from curious interest to genuine warmth. Garrick, standing nearby, allowed himself a small, satisfied smile at how thoroughly the day's events had unfolded in their favor. In the days that followed, the pack settled gradually back into stability under Kale's restored leadership. Bram faced formal judgment before the full council, stripped of his position and exiled from pack territory permanently, a fate that many considered merciful compared to the punishment his betrayal might have warranted under harsher interpretations of pack law. Colin, in recognition of his eventual cooperation and testimony, received a reduced punishment, tasked with an extended period of service under close supervision, a path toward eventually rebuilding the trust his earlier actions had shattered. Throughout this transition, Mira remained close by Kale's side, though she found herself increasingly uncertain about her own place within this unfamiliar world of pack politics and formal ceremony. The great stone halls, the elaborate customs, the weight of expectation now surrounding Kale as he worked to fully restore stability, all of it felt distant from the simple, quiet life she had known before finding a wounded stranger in the forest. "You've grown quiet again," Kale observed one evening, finding her sitting alone on a balcony overlooking the mountain valley below, the same star-filled sky stretching above them that had witnessed their conversation at the outpost weeks earlier. "Just adjusting," Mira admitted. "This is all so different from anything I've known. Sometimes I wonder if I truly belong here, among all this formality and history." Kale settled beside her, taking her hand gently in his. "Mira, from the very first night you shared your last piece of bread with a stranger you owed nothing, you've shown more genuine understanding of what leadership should mean than most wolves born into this world of formality and tradition. This pack doesn't need less of your influence, it needs more." "What are you saying?" Mira asked, though something in his tone suggested she already understood the direction of his thoughts. "I'm saying that these past weeks, watching you care for strangers without hesitation, stand firm against danger despite overwhelming odds, offer wisdom drawn from genuine experience rather than empty political theory, I've come to understand something I never expected to feel this deeply." Kale turned to face her fully, his expression open and vulnerable in a way she had rarely witnessed even during their most private conversations. "I love you, Mira, not despite your humble beginnings, but because of the remarkable character those beginnings helped shape within you." Mira's breath caught at his words, emotions swirling through her that she had carefully avoided fully acknowledging even to herself throughout their journey together. "Kale, You don't have to answer immediately, Baristi," Kale said gently, though hope flickered clearly behind his careful composure. "I understand this world, this life, asks a great deal of anyone unfamiliar with its customs, but I want you to know clearly what I feel, regardless of what you choose to do with that knowledge." Mira studied his face for a long, quiet moment, considering everything they had shared since that first desperate night in the forest, the kindness, the danger, the growing trust and understanding that had blossomed between them despite circumstances neither could have ever anticipated. Finally, she smiled, warm and genuine, reaching to gently touch his face. "I love you too, Kale," she said softly. "I think I have for longer than I've allowed myself to fully admit. This world may be unfamiliar, but you've never once made me feel unwelcome within it. If you're asking whether I want to stay, whether I want to build something lasting alongside you, my answer is yes." Relief and joy flooded through Kale's expression as he pulled her gently into an embrace, the tension of recent weeks finally giving way to genuine, uncomplicated happiness. Above them, the same stars that had witnessed their earlier uncertain conversation now seemed to shine down upon a much clearer, more hopeful path forward, one neither of them could have imagined when a simple piece of shared bread first brought them together in a dark, dangerous forest. News of the king's restoration and his intention to formally recognize Mira as his chosen partner spread quickly throughout pack territory, generating a mixture of curiosity, skepticism, and cautious acceptance among the wider population. Not everyone within the pack welcomed the idea of a human standing beside their alpha king with open enthusiasm, and Kale understood clearly that winning genuine acceptance would require more than simple proclamation. There will be resistance, Garrick warned during one of their strategic discussions in the weeks following Bram's downfall. Old prejudices don't fade quickly, especially among the more traditional territories that have always viewed humans as separate, lesser beings unworthy of true partnership within pack society. Then we address that resistance honestly, through action rather than mere declaration, Kale replied firmly. Mira has already proven her character through everything she's endured and accomplished since finding me in that forest. Those who witness her genuine care and wisdom firsthand will find their prejudices difficult to maintain. Mira, for her part, embraced this challenge with the same quiet determination that had defined her throughout their journey together. She began spending time among the pack's citizens, listening to their concerns, offering practical assistance wherever her limited but genuine skills could prove useful, slowly building relationships based on authentic character, rather than her unusual position as a human within wolf society. One particular encounter proved especially significant in shifting broader pack sentiment. During a visit to one of the outer territories, Mira encountered a young wolf pup separated from her family during a sudden storm, frightened and alone in unfamiliar terrain. Without hesitation, despite the obvious risk involved in approaching an unfamiliar and frightened young wolf, Mira knelt down, speaking softly and offering comfort until the pup's family could be located and reunited safely. Word of this small act of kindness spread quickly through the surrounding territory, softening skepticism among wolves who had previously questioned whether a human could genuinely care about pack welfare beyond her personal relationship with the king. Similar small moments accumulated steadily over the following weeks, each one chipping away gradually at the resistance Garrick had warned about. "You're winning them over," Kale observed one evening, watching Mira interact easily with a group of pack elders who had initially approached their meeting with obvious reservation, but departed with expressions of genuine warmth and respect. "I'm just being myself," Mira said with a small smile. "The same way I approached everything back in the village. Kindness doesn't require grand gestures, just genuine care applied consistently, wherever it's needed." As months passed, the formal ceremony recognizing Mira's position as Luna, the traditional title given to an alpha's chosen partner, was scheduled to coincide with the pack's annual gathering, an event that drew wolves from every territory under Kale's rule. The preparation for this ceremony brought its own unique challenges, as Mira navigated unfamiliar customs and traditions with the patient guidance of pack elders who had grown increasingly fond of her genuine efforts to honor their heritage properly. The day of the ceremony arrived clear and bright, the great hall decorated elaborately for the occasion, filled with representatives from every corner of the northern territories. Mira stood at the entrance, dressed in garments that blended traditional pack styling with elements reflecting her own humble origins, a deliberate choice meant to honor both the world she was joining and the world that had shaped her character before this remarkable journey began. Kale waited at the hall's center, his expression a mixture of pride and quiet emotion as he watched her approach through the gathered crowd. The ceremony itself followed ancient customs, formal declarations exchanged between alpha and chosen partner, witnessed by the full assembly of pack leadership and citizens who had traveled considerable distances to witness this historic moment. "Do you, Mira, accept the responsibilities and honor of standing as Luna beside your alpha king?" the officiating elder intoned formally, "pledging your care and wisdom toward the well-being of this entire pack, alongside your personal bond with its rightful leader?" "I do," Mira said clearly, her voice carrying steadily across the silent hall, "with the same commitment to genuine kindness that has guided every choice I've made since the moment I first offered help to someone in need, regardless of what that help might cost me personally." The formal exchange concluded with traditional vows between Kale and Mira themselves, promises of partnership and mutual support that echoed the genuine bond they had built together through hardship, danger, and growing understanding since that first fateful night in the forest. As the ceremony reached its conclusion, the assembled crowd erupted into genuine celebration. Any lingering reservations about a human joining pack leadership largely dissolved by the obvious sincerity and character Mira had demonstrated consistently throughout the preceding months. Following the formal ceremony, a celebration stretched long into the evening, wolves and human allies alike gathering to mark the beginning of what many already sensed would prove a significant, positive shift in how the Northern Territories approached questions of leadership, compassion, and the value of character over rigid tradition. Late in the evening, as the celebration continued around them, Kale found a quiet moment to pull Mira aside, leading her toward the same balcony where he had first confessed his feelings months earlier. The mountain valley stretched below them, moonlight illuminating the peaceful landscape that Mira had come to think of as home over these transformative months. "Do you remember?" Kale asked softly. "The question you asked me that very first night, when you found me bleeding in the forest?" Mira smiled, the memory clear and precious, despite everything that had unfolded since. "Are you hungry too?" she said quietly. That simple question changed everything, Kale said, his voice thick with emotion. "Not just because it led to my survival, but because it revealed exactly the kind of character I would come to love completely. You saw a stranger in need and responded with genuine kindness, expecting nothing in return. That single choice reshaped an entire kingdom's future." "I just saw someone hungry," Mira said simply. Everything else followed from that one simple truth. Kale pulled her gently into his arms, holding her close as they watched the moonlight play across the peaceful valley below. "Whatever comes next, whatever challenges this pack faces in the future, I know we'll face them together, guided by the same simple, genuine kindness that brought us together in the first place." In the months and years that followed, Mira's influence as Luna reshaped many aspects of pack tradition, introducing greater compassion toward the vulnerable, stronger connections with neighboring human settlements, and a leadership philosophy that balanced strength with genuine care for every member of the community, regardless of rank or origin. The starving girl who had once shared her last piece of bread with a dying stranger had become a queen who never forgot what true hunger felt like, ensuring that no one within her care would ever face that same desperate emptiness alone. And on quiet evenings, when the demands of leadership allowed a moment's peace, Kale and Mira would often return to that same balcony, watching the stars stretch endlessly above the mountains, grateful beyond words for the simple, unexpected question that had brought them together and changed both their lives forever. "Are you hungry too?" A question born from compassion, answered with gratitude, and destined to echo through generations as the true foundation upon which their shared kingdom would continue to grow, strengthen, and thrive.